Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Priori. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager at TPGI. We're just going to wait 1 minute as people sign in, and we will get started briefly. I still see a few people trickling in, so we're just going to give it 1 more minute for everyone to sign in and get ready, and then we'll get started. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar, User-Centered Testing with User Journeys, with TPGI's Charlie Pike, Director of Platform Success. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items I'd like to get to. So firstly, this session is being recorded and we will email everyone the recording after the event. Secondly, we have captions available, so feel free to use those as needed. Next, we will have time for a live Q&A later in the webinar, so please use the Q&A box and we will answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Just as to emphasize, the Q&A box is a little bit easier for us to read the questions. Sometimes questions can get lost in chat. We will be reviewing both, but it is a little easier for us to find them and read them and answer them if they are in the Q&A box. And then lastly, if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, or usability testing, we will send out an email with a link to schedule a time to speak with one of our experts. So with that, I'll pass off to Charlie and let him get started. Take it away, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and welcome everybody to our presentation today, User-Centered Testing with User Journeys. So, as Anthony said, I am the Director of Platform Success here at TPGI. What that means really is I'm a liaison between our customers, particularly our enterprise customers, and our platform, which includes our web accessibility testing tools and our assistive technology testing tools. and so on, all of those things. So what I'm going to be talking to you today about is really how to get sort of user-centered testing with user journeys into your test processes and into the way that you look at accessibility. So that kind of as opposed to the compliance testing that we've seen a lot over the years. And I've been involved in accessibility since about 2003 now. So I've seen all kinds of testing up and down the industry, from small organizations to very large government bodies and enterprises. And so I've seen a lot of how this is done, and this is really something that isn't addressed enough, or a methodology that isn't really followed enough. So I'm going to do a live demonstration using tools of some of these techniques, but first of all, I'm going to take you through some slides, an introduction, why we use user journeys, a look at building user journeys. This is not a technical presentation on exactly how to construct personas and user journeys. I'm just giving an outline here today on how this is done. I want to focus much more on how to use that in the context of accessibility testing, okay, or a combination of usability and accessibility testing, if you like. So user journeys. Why have user journeys? And by the way, that's not an absolute and consistently used term. We have things like user flows, and different organizations might call these different things. So user journeys, obviously, we're thinking in terms of user completing a task on a site or an application, following through with goals in mind to achieve something, and completing that task. So what do user journeys give us? Well, particularly in the area of accessibility, it gives us a more user-centered design. Accessibility can be all about compliance testing and following guidelines, right? And we ourselves obviously do a lot of that in terms of our audits, so on. But that may not actually connect you very well with the users, okay? But doing this kind of user-focused testing, where we're looking at a user completing a task, makes that much more user-centered. Okay, and there's not enough of that, frankly, in the design process and in the testing process. Better identify user needs. Okay, better understand what people are trying to do. If you've got focused on the tasks that they're trying to achieve, and the things that might be barriers to those, you much better understand the problem that they face, which of course helps you prioritize things and not waste a lot of effort and time on things that are unlikely to affect users very much. And it helps you build useful software and websites. As I said, I've been in this business for a long time, and I've seen a lot of stuff that you wonder why it was built at all, or what it was there to do. Very often software and websites are built because we can, or because it's very tech driven, and it's what we can do or what will be cool. Keeping focused on what a user actually will do with the software is very important, and it's actually not a discipline that's widely applied. Staying always focused on what the user is trying to do with what it is you are building is very important. And of course, accessibility is part of that. So user journeys in accessibility testing, as I mentioned, it helps you focus on core tasks. And another thing to consider here is we deal with a lot of very large organizations. Universities are a good example, that might have hundreds, thousands of applications and websites, and they are never going to be compliant. Okay, they're never going to be WCAG compliant across the board. I've seen many of them over time make announcements that they're going to achieve these goals, and they're going to get this level of compliance, but the reality is they're not. So really, they have to be very, very laser focused on the main things that people need to do. They need to focus on those tasks and make sure they are compliant and fully accessible at the very least. So this is an important process in making sure that whatever you're doing is going to have the maximum impact on your users, that you're not going to spend a lot of time doing accessibility on things that are rarely visited or not really core to the users. Task completion and efficiency, not compliance. Okay, for people being able to use it, and that often means going above and beyond what would be in the WCAG guidelines, for instance, to make sure that things are efficient for the user. So it's not enough just to do technical testing from accessibility point of view and make sure things are your tags are well formed and you have the right attributes, etc., etc. You need to make sure that those things actually work with reasonable efficiency, and the users don't have to jump through elaborate hoops to be able to do simple tasks. And also you get a cross section of UI on content. So this is something I'm going to be talking about today. When we do our manual audits, we do something called a sampling. So we can't test all of the screens, for example, in an application. There's too many. And the work of doing an audit is too intensive. So of course, we select what we call a representative sampling. So we try to get all the unique UI elements into samples. So one will be a dialog box, another sample will be a grid, right? And examples of how all of those things are done in the application, and we test those in detail, and they then stand for the whole. And this user journey testing is again another layer to that, to make sure that your representative sampling also includes the steps in a key task. And that can then stand for the rest. In other words, you can use that as a test, a kind of a cross section of your application when you've got a lot of stuff to test, and then it will stand for the whole. In other words, where you find problems along a particular part of the path, you might go in deeper into the surrounding elements there. And so where you can't test everything, you can have a very, very close zoomed in view of particular user flows or user journeys, and they can help you as a barometer of overall how you're doing across your application or site. So going into building of user journeys and how you build them. Well, the first step always to these things is personas. And again, I'm not going to go into all the details of how personas are built, and there are different ways. And I'm certainly not a user research specialist, so I don't do a lot of these. But essentially, personas are the first step and the foundation of your user journeys. And the better you do these, the more effective they're going to be going forward. One of the main advantages of personas is it does personalize what you're doing. You want to make sure that the experience for this person, and we've created a persona, Victoria Aquino here, this person is able to complete the things they do, and it connects you with your users. It's quite motivational for your developers and testers. And it really helps because when you're testing, you can really understand the problems that they're facing. And it's not just a set of guidelines, test guidelines. So obviously, there are different philosophies and thoughts around the detail that you build these personas. Here we've got a very simple one. She's 38 years old, college graduate. Develop some basic details that gives a picture of this person, particularly technical, that she's a laptop with braille display and an iPhone. Okay, important when you're putting personas together that include people with disabilities, that you're aware, it'd be good, of course, to base it to some degree on people that you've tested with or done user research with, but disabilities often come together. Different types, blind and hearing, mobility impairments with other kinds of disabilities. It's often not just one, and the characterizations are all different. So you have to be flexible. And this is one of the advantages of personas, is making it real. And we've got here some details about ability. So we've got background, we've got goals and motivations. Okay. and pain points, particularly what upsets them, and the technologies. This is obviously very important for our testing when we're building out test plans and so on. So again, different ideas about what to put in these personas, but at the very least, you need that background, you need some sense of their goals and motivations, some sense of pain points, things that are not right for them. For instance, in this example, we've got unclear navigation is a pain point, and lack of useful descriptions for products and images. Okay, here we've got a screen reader user. So you build out your personas, and they help to tell you what that user journey will actually look like. Another case where user journeys are developed is actually in the UX design. And again, we're talking about usability, and these user journeys should be part of every part of the process if you want it to follow through. So in UX design, in development and in specifying, user journeys are used to really identify the various features and functions by leading first with the task. So here we're an example of a classic sort of administration task on a web app, right? Add users and assign roles, user activity, okay? So classic web application. Create a new role is the main task, invite a new user, and then associate the user with the role. Okay, those are the main tasks. And then what do you need for each of those things? To create a new role, you need a list of roles, you need to edit the role, archive or unarchive the role, and delete the role. Okay, so in that case, we're identifying what the user needs to do. And then from that, we are figuring out what features we need, not the other way around. Okay, we're not doing it the other way around where we're just deciding on what we're going to have a dialog box with this, that, and the other thing. We're focused on what we need to do. And that obviously, again, helps us to prioritize building things that are important to the user and not extraneous things. But you can see that when we do those things, we're identifying key tasks, and that can then inform how we're going to test and what the tasks are when we come to test. So you list the core tasks to perform, capture the functionality, and build out your user journeys. So you can then use those user journeys and personas to build out your user journeys as a whole. Now, this is an example of a complete user journey in the more typical form that we generally see them, and that's around both marketing and usability. And it's more about tracking. So in this example for our online shopping customer journey map, you've got things that go outside of the actual website. So it's the whole process for the user, okay, from start to finish to when the actual product is actually delivered. And you're tracking their experiences and their feelings about those experiences. And that, of course, helps you identify processes and gaps in your processes and so on that might not be effective. So that's the complete picture. But what we're looking for is a slightly scaled down version because we want to use our user journeys for our accessibility testing. So here's an example in our shopping site. So I'm going to use our demo shopping site that we use for all our various demos here. And so we've got a scenario. Victoria needs to buy new sneakers for her son. She's price sensitive, but for her sites that provide detailed information about their products. Okay, and her expectations are a large range, easy to browse, easy to get around. We know how she feels about navigation, ability to compare brands, and clear pricing. Okay, those are the things she most wants. So we need to gauge how effective those things are as we go. And then we break this down into simple tasks. So first we've got the overall task: browses the site, evaluates products, pays. Okay, and the activities are to check out deals, browse the various categories, select products, add products to cart, and so on. We've got steps for all of those. Now, this could, of course, be a much more detailed test plan, which is quite prescriptive. Do this, tab to this button, select this item. or you can have them on broader views. But the goal is basically that you're building out a test plan that you can do regularly on that particular tasks from that user's perspective, and then use your different personas to do the tests differently with different assistive technologies or what have you. So when it comes to actually testing the user journeys, there's actually a variety of types of testing that you can do. This is an image that I use a lot in my webinars, what I call the testing onion. And it's that because there are different layers to the testing and different places where you would do those. The outermost layer that I've identified here are domain scans. So that's automated testing. And what we mean by domain scans is scanning an entire site or scanning an entire application. And you might be doing that on a regular basis, and you're testing a subset of accessibility criteria there, and you're looking for the broad picture, the trends. Are we getting better or worse? What are our priorities? Then also we have user flow testing, which is a more zoomed in layer. And by user flows, it's essentially user journeys, but we're talking in a more technical way. So we're tracking the specific actions of the user, but again, it's automated testing. Okay, so the just like with Selenium and so on, for instance, our ARC application, our Accessibility Resource Center, has this capability of testing user flow. So it might go through that whole process of selecting items in the shop, adding them to the cart, checking out the cart, and so on. You can automate that and then scan those on a regular basis. Again, because it's automated testing, you're only testing a subset of the criteria, but it's a very good indicator for you, especially when things change. Okay. And then you have your manual expert audits. They, of course, are detailed compliance audits where you're looking at, for instance, in the entirety of the WCAG criteria. And as I mentioned before, they need to be very, very focused on a sample, okay, because they're labor intensive and they require expertise. But again, you can see a trend here. If you are testing these same user flows using these automated and manual processes, you're able to use them in tandem. Okay, you're able to, for instance, identify in a user flow where there's an issue that's come up, and that might be a guide to you to go in and actually do a manual audit on that item. Okay, and then at the core, the real sort of gold in the center are things like AT testing, which you'll probably do as part of your manual audits as well, assistive technology testing, user feedback, and user research. Okay, and that's really where you're entirely focused on the users, and that at the end of the day is the ultimate barometer of how accessible you are. Okay, and not enough of that is done. So the goal here is to focus it all of those layers of testing to some degree on the user and on your user journeys. So taking those user journeys and the types of testing, just have a look at the different tools and testing tools out there and who might do them and where. So we have the crawl scan, which is like the domain scan that I mentioned, that's automated. And the typical roles would be accessibility team or product manager. Okay, so anyone who's oversight over the accessibility in a broad level of, for example, a site or even part of a site, would be doing that regular, where they're really looking for trends. They're looking for what changes, what kind of process issues might be causing changes, and so on. So your frequency might be monthly. You're really looking for a baseline. So you're looking for a steady data set, if you like, over time, that you can properly gauge where you are and see changes when they happen. Okay, so if you're constantly changing the frequency and what you're testing, then you're not going to be able to compare and see things over the long time. JAWS Inspect, which I'll talk to about a bit, but under the general heading of assistive technology testing, that's manual on the whole. And teams that can do that are obviously QA teams, UX teams, and development teams. okay, can use those to do testing. You really want to be doing some level of that with each release because you want to stay focused on your users, okay, and their assistive technologies. You want to make sure that what you're doing is compliant, but you can do some level of that testing without, spending a great deal of time, and I'll talk about that in a little while. Then we have things like the ARC Toolkit. The ARC Toolkit is a browser plugin, and it does technical accessibility testing, checking your tags, checking compliance with WCAG. And that's both automated and manual. I'll show it to you. And that can really be used by anybody, your QA teams, your UX teams, content authors, dev, even on the desktop before you commit code, you can run the toolkit to check the accessibility. So again, you could be checking your user journey with the toolkit. And then you have the compliance audit. That's the manual testing I talked about. And that does require some degree of expertise. Okay. But that's not something you would be doing all the time. It's probably yearly in tandem with doing accessibility, a VPAT, etc. And then user research is obviously the ultimate way to gauge your accessibility and usability, something that's often done more typically when redesigns are happening or major new releases. It's not done as much as it should be. It's really, really valuable, and then can feed back to you when you do user research. It'll also help you refine your personas and refine your tasks and goals, etc. So I mentioned earlier that you do sampling when you're doing manual testing. And the way we do sampling is we select a component. I know that's not very visible in this screenshot that I have here, but this is a filter component on a shopping website with different categories, price, etc. We've taken that as an example, right, of different types of components. So in here, we've got disclosure widgets, slider controls, color pickers, and checkboxes. So they're examples of how all of those things are implemented on this app or website, and that's why we chose it. So when we do these, we basically define what it is, but also what it's meant to represent, what it covers, so that it's clear. If we find issues here and give it to a developer and say you got these issues with the filters and so on, that doesn't mean they just go off and fix this one particular thing. They're supposed to understand that all our sliders may have the same issues, and we have to fix it on all our sliders across the application. But that's just good to know. That's how we define our samples, to make it clear what they're samples of, why we selected them. Okay. And then what I'm saying here is that for our user journeys, we should make those samples each part of the user journey, so that for the same reason, we can keep user focus in all of our testing. And just to explain JAWS Inspect, in case you don't know what that is. So that's actually JAWS for testing. It's a desktop product that we have, and it simplifies JAWS testing by giving you a transcript of JAWS speech, okay, to help you diagnose issues. So it's a pared down version of JAWS. It's not a simulation of JAWS. It is JAWS, but it's pared down. A lot of the end user features are turned off in order to make it very simple for testers to use and to share the JAWS speech out with their developers and so on when they find issues. So it can be used for AT testing, and I'll be showing you in a second how to use it with user journeys and so on. But the benefits are it simplifies JAWS use for testers, provides a text transcripts of JAWS output for use in bug tracking and compliance programs, and helps with the identification of issues, etc. And it's rapid rollout, etc. So it's just much easier for testers to use, to roll out, to train, and get up and running with their testing. So I wanted to show you that because I'm going over to a Windows PC here, a virtual PC where I have JAWS Inspect running, just to show you how this works. So here we've got our demo shopping site, and we've built out our test plan where our user is going to come in, is going to look for sneakers, add them to the cart, and so on. And you can use the likes of JAWS Inspect in this kind of testing to really understand what the JAWS user's experience is like. And we have a tool here. So to be clear about JAWS Inspect, so it's a desktop product, and it actually runs in the background here. There's very little interface. I mentioned that it's easy to use. And in fact, when I control and right click, I bring up the JAWS Inspect menu in the browser, which is the main interface for the product. Okay. When I do these demos with JAWS Inspect, it's often pointed out, it's a very clicky demo, but I'm not a screen reader user. In fact, we have a lot of screen reader users that use JAWS Inspect, and it is fully accessible. So just be aware if I'm talking about click this, click that. There are keyboard shortcuts for all of these. And I'm going to open something called the speech viewer. Okay, the speech viewer is one of the tools in JAWS Inspect. And what it is a live log of the JAWS speech. So it's very close to the actual JAWS user experience. Okay, and so it basically runs. At the moment, it's running. And I can run through all the various tasks in my flow with this running, and I'll get the JAWS speech as I go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to place focus by clicking down on the navigation bar at the top, and immediately you see the log. So it reads out the first things: home, ARC demo site, and then goes down to the first link. When we've clicked here, is it visited heading level 1 link AS. Okay, so it's giving us exactly what JAWS would say in these instances. First, the home page or the title of the page, and then the first link. And the text in green bold that's highlight or that's italicized here is the helper text that JAWS gives to the user to help them understand the context of what they're dealing with. Okay, in this case, it's a link and it's visited. Okay, that's information that comes from the browser to JAWS, and JAWS tells the user to make sure that they understand what they're interacting with. Okay, the rest is content that's generally provided, like the AS is the content provided by the developer, content author, as part of that element. Okay, so as I go through the task, I'm going to use the tab key. One of the things that it's really good to note here, and I hadn't really thought about it in the past, but somebody mentioned it recently, a lot of developers would not be used to using their applications with the keyboard. Okay, they may not even be that familiar on how to use it with the keyboard. If you do nothing else in accessibility testing, get started on using the keyboard for testing. Put aside the mouse, get your teams testing with the keyboard. It's the foundational accessibility item for lots of people. They need, JAWS users need the keyboard. People with mobility impairments need to use the keyboard. Keyboard is a basic requirement. And just by putting away the mouse and being forced to use the keyboard in this way, your development teams, your testing teams will learn a lot. Okay. In this case, I'm just using it at a very basic level. So I'm just using the tab key or the shift tab to go backwards. Okay, and likewise the arrow keys and so on. JAWS Inspect only recognizes those keys. It doesn't use the other JAWS shortcut keys, although you can. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So I'm going to use the keyboard to go through this process just like a user, and I'm getting the output. Now, if I was listening to the JAWS speech, this would be a lot more difficult. First of all, I'd have to, JAWS by default tends to talk fairly quickly, catch what it's saying, and then I need to go back and forth. Hang on, what was that? Was that the home button? Was it the icon? Where was it? Whereas this allows you to really track exactly where these things come up. You've got a log and to figure out what JAWS says and do it in your own time. Okay, so here we've got to the shop menu, and the shop menu is dropped down, and I can go through the items and it says shop link, women link, and so on, mend link. So I can be checking all the time that these things are labeled correctly. And as part of our process, we're going to go into that mend link to look for a sneaker. And I can do that now. It's coming, sorry, it's a little bit slow. And I can continue to run through this process and I'm still getting this log. So I can start to go through these items again. Going through the keyboard really teaches you how efficient it is for your users, particularly your JAWS users, to get around. Can they skip over content? Can they get quickly to items? Okay, now I'm at our filter control, which is one of the samples that I showed you in the PowerPoint. So this is part of our process, and it's an example of a filter. And we want to test certain things. So we've got JAWS stating category button expanded. Okay, that's nice. We know the name, we know the role button, and we know the state that it's expanded. So those are the basic things we want to be testing for controls, the identity, role, and state of the control in order for the user to be able to use it. So I'm actually going to go back here and check, and here we see collapsed. Okay, the state is now collapsed. So that's what we want to test in our dynamic application. We want to make sure that the state is correctly changed and updated when we change it to the JAWS user to pick it up. Okay, and then we go down to price. Now I'm just going to hit the enter key to expand that. Okay, expands nicely and the state is expanded. And then I put focus on one end of the slider and I'm going to use the arrow key to move it along. I'm just going to use the tab key here to go back through that. So all the time I expand this with the enter key and then select these, and it's giving me the colors correctly: blue, white, checkbox not checked. So that's exposed as a checkbox. That's fine. That's a nice bit of what we would call graceful degradation there, making sure that there's a control that users can easily understand, and so on. So I go through the process. I'm tracking all the time. I'm going to go in and select the product. I just hit the enter key there to select the product. And I'm going to tab through. And one of the important things you're looking for when you're tabbing through, I'm going backwards, shift tab here, just because of where the focus was. Let me just bring it down a little. One of the things you're looking for when you're testing with the keyboard is always going to be, can you track the focus? Okay, is there a clear visual indication of where the focus is? And you'll find, if it's not the case, you'll find yourself getting lost. Okay, for the simple reason that you can't see where your focus is. You're tabbing and you don't know where you are because there's nothing on the screen that's telling you. So that's for visual users who are dependent on the keyboard, using the keyboard, and will lose their focus. So we're going to open this select box. Oops, sorry. Okay, so I need to use the space bar there. Oops. And then I can select 7. Okay, select that. And I've my focus has now shifted back. So when we talk about efficiency, we are losing some efficiency here for the user. This is something that is not going to come up necessarily in standard technical accessibility testing, because technically, if things are reachable by the keyboard, they should be fine. It's when you do this kind of testing with the keyboard that you actually find these inefficiencies that go on. And then we're just going to go and add that to the cart. And out comes our cart. And there our focus you'll notice the next tab stop is right there on the cart, which is great. I've opened the cart, I've gone in, and I can access these controls. If I tab around, I'm going to stay in the cart, so it's modal, that's good. And then I'm going to go and view the cart and open that up. So all this time, I'm getting a log of the JAWS speech. Okay, again, we've got social bar list with 6 items, Instagram. So we're down the bottom here in terms of our focus. We come back up. Okay, and we say enter a promo code. Let's just press enter. Okay, we've got a nice, again, we've got the state of this, whether it's open or closed. We go to add a note. We need the space bar. And we'll notice here that there's no title for this element. We hit an add a note button and it was collapsed. That's good. But then when we come in, we just got blank and a placeholder. Okay, so we're missing title there. So that's something that you would report back to your teams and say, this is missing and we need to provide this. And with JAWS Inspect, it can be provided. So you can export this as a spreadsheet, a CSV, and you can send it to your team. You can select individual items and just send those. And then you can point out to them, look, we need a proper title for this particular text box in here. So that's missing. So I'm just going to pause this now, pause our log. So that might be the point. So if you complete the whole task and go through the whole checkout process and save it, you can run this in a headless mode. So you can run it in tandem with the likes of Selenium testing. You won't have this interface here. As I said, it's headless, but you can capture a log of JAWS speech using the speech viewer. Okay, so you can run it with scripting in an automated way as well. But what's this done for us is it's combined the sampling where we're capturing all the various types of controls in this application at the same time as the actual tasks themselves. So by following the user journey, we're getting that sort of focus on what's important. What does the user need to complete? They need to be able to do this checkout on the shopping site. So if we're looking at our JAWS user, the JAWS user needs to be able to complete these tasks efficiently with the keyboard, with all the information they need for each control. And anywhere else where we have buttons, or if we have, these pop-up images, we have these disclosure widgets, as we call them, that open and close. Anywhere where we have those, we can extrapolate that there's probably, if we found issues here, there's probably issues elsewhere, and we need to address that. And maybe we're getting these controls from a third-party library, so we need to go back to the third party and get them to fix the issues, all dependent. But our user journey helps to focus our efforts and our testing efforts. I also mentioned the ARC Toolkit. So the ARC Toolkit is a browser extension, and it's free. It's available from, for instance, the Chrome store. You can run it on Firefox, Edge, Chromium, etc. And essentially, you're running your accessibility testing right here in the browser. And it organizes things into, it doesn't sort of require a deep knowledge of WCAG, etc. It breaks things down into easy to understand categories, images, keyboard, etc., and highlights those issues on the page for you. Okay, so our no link text there, duplicate labels used on the search box there. It'll highlight them for you. Very, very easy to use. Content authors can use this to test their pages. Developers can use it. So you can use it to technically test your user flow, whether you're a developer working on the desktop and you haven't committed your code yet, or you're a content author in a content management system, checking the output, checking that your tags are done correctly. It combines these automated checks with manual checks. So you can test, for instance, your heading structure and make sure that your page is organized with nice headings and they're nested correctly. Okay. It'll also the tab order. Okay. We talked about that in terms of the efficiency for keyboard user, here you can actually get a visual flow of the tab order and check the tab order. So you can direct your teams to do regular testing that's not a detailed audit on stuff, particularly on your user journeys, right, on a constant basis. So this is great for, you know, a lot of resistance to accessibility and usability testing is around the time taken. Okay, but if you've set up these assets, which are effectively your samples, okay, and identified them, you've already pared down the amount of work, the amount that has to be tested. And also, if you focus in on some core tests like alternate text for images, identity role and state for controls, keyboard access, and just focus on those, you can do that testing regularly and easily. Okay. And the other dimension that I wanted to show you was actually the monitoring that I mentioned. So here I've switched over to ARC, which is our Accessibility Resource Center. Okay, and this is really for both the accessibility teams and those who are managing the whole accessibility of a website or a bunch of websites or whatever. And again, you're looking here for overall trends, right? And we can see here that it increased a while ago sharply. So that might be a point where you go and you say, well, look, we've increased our finding density, which is the number of findings or accessibility issues we've located. And that's gone up. So why? Did we introduce something into the site at that time? Did we change our process in any way? Did we release something new and didn't do our testing? What was the cause of that? And these automated testing is great for that, for identifying these kind of broad trends that you don't get when you're in the weeds doing audits and so on. So here, if I go to the dashboard, we've got, again, our trend line, but we're going to focus in on a user flow. Okay, so we've got our shopping cart flow, the same one that we tested with JAWS Inspect. I'm just going to apply this here, and now it's got its own trend line. So this view is a filter that we've built out for our dashboard. Okay, so filters are just a set of criteria. In this case, we've chosen specifically a very particular project, which is our user flow, and that's the one we're looking at in this case. So you save those filters and they become views that you can then apply, share with your team, and so on. So these issues that we found, just like in the toolkit and ARC here use exactly the same rule set, the ARC rule set. So you can compare like with like. So if your teams are working away in deep levels and deep environments on testing, you can effectively monitor the results at this level on a monthly basis on the actual output, the production environment, okay? And make sure that the overall effect is that you're improving your accessibility. But you've got that line of sight because everybody's doing the same tests on the same stuff, okay? And that's one of the real challenges an enterprise accessibility program is getting that line of sight, because people are often using different testing methodologies at different levels, and you can't compare like for like. So therefore, you don't get the sense of testing that's happening in deep environments, then bubbling up to your production environment and how to monitor that. So that's very important to be using the same rules and so on. So again, there's our no link text issue in the header on the shopping cart flow. And if we dig into that, we get our guidance on what that no link text issue is, all the information that we need to hand on what the issue is. There's guidance on providing prescriptive links, very short, clear articles here, providing clear link text with code examples. So we can understand both why it's important, how to achieve the WCAG conformance with clear coding examples, and how to implement the patterns that we need to effectively implement the fix, along with also who is affected by this issue, and how to test the issue, how to get it into your test process. And then as we dig down, we can then see where that issue occurs in the code. So we're just, after a couple of clicks, we're straight down into, these are the 3 instances of that particular links without link text on that particular component, the header component. And these user flows can then be used. So user flows will be the same journey. It will be the whole shopping cart process, but in this case, we're automating, which means we can run it constantly. And where we see issues pop up, we can then direct our teams to go in, test this with the toolkit, test this with your assistive technology, see what's going on there, why we have a problem. Okay, so it's a very good indicator. Likewise, if you do a manual test on those same components, the same user flow, then you can then monitor the remediation. So let's say you find 150 issues in that flow, whatever. As the team fixes that, if you're monitoring, you're able to watch how that's going. And if it's going in the right direction or if it's going in the wrong direction. If things are getting worse, then it's time to intervene, maybe retrain the team, find out what's going on there. And then when you're down to 0 issues, that might be the time to finally retest and verify that everything is fixed correctly. And we set up those user flows. We're just looking at our projects here. Here's our shopping cart flow. They actually use Selenium type commands, open the page, choose the particular items such as the input, search suggestions box, for instance. And again, we identify what they are. Okay, in this case, a modal. And the purpose of that is to say what it stands for. This is an example of a modal. So issues that we find here, you need to check in all your other modals as well. Okay, and you can have more than one pattern, but we're identifying what the sample is. Okay, there's our men's shoe page, opening up and testing that whole page. The product filters section. So Arc can automate those, can act as a user in a headless mode, go in, select the filters, and then browse the site and go through the whole shopping cart process, testing the accessibility on the way. So you are using, in all those cases, you are using your user journey that you've built out as the basis, both sampling and for being connected to the users and checking to make sure that the users can complete these core tasks at all times. So that at an absolute minimum, whatever your level of compliance, you know that your users can, for instance, go onto this site, select an item, buy it, take it through the whole process, and that it's efficient for them. Okay. And if you focus on those same tasks all along the way, you also get that comparison of data that can help you to track overall progress and see what it took, for instance, to get from one stage of accessibility to another. So that's it. So I will open it up for questions now. I didn't leave that much time, I realize. Let me just have a look in our chat. Do we have? No specific questions here. There's someone asking where is the skip link in the tabbing order. That was actually at the very start in the tab order on that particular.
We do have some questions in the Q&A box, Charlie.
Oh, I do. Okay, 1 second. And see those. Ah, yeah, here we go. Does JAWS Inspect only allow to tab through interactive items, or can you use the arrow keys like you would when using JAWS? Yes, you can use the arrow keys. If you want to have the full set of shortcut keys, JAWS shortcut keys, for instance, you want to go into forms mode, or you're an experienced JAWS user, then you can use JAWS in parallel. So you can run JAWS at the same time, turn off the audio, and JAWS Inspect will work the same, but then you also can use all your various shortcut keys. So you can, for instance, press the H key and hear the headings, or open the links list, or whatever you want to do. So if you're an experienced JAWS user, you can run them together, and then JAWS Inspect will allow you to use all the various JAWS shortcut keys. Can you also use JAWS Inspect on PDFs? Yes, you can. You can open up PDFs. In fact, it will run on anything that JAWS runs on the desktop. So you can run it on PDFs, you can run it on Word documents, and so on, with the speech viewer. There are other types of reports that don't run, they only run in the browser, but the speech viewer, that live log, will run with PDFs. Another question, we are new to ADA compliance. I am interested in learning more about ARC. Do you have a recommendation on how to learn the tool? So yeah, I mean, ARC has there's great training that comes with ARC. We also have an empowerment program for ARC users, our customers, where you get a complete end-to-end training in not just how to use the tool, but how to go about testing, how to interpret the data, how to set priorities and things. So really how to do that sort of automated accessibility testing for an enterprise. We are new to ADA. Oh, sorry, I've just read that. The next one, within my organization, I get a lot of pushback that user journeys fall into usability testing and not accessibility testing. What justification is there for saying it should fall into accessibility testing? Well, I mean, there's a few there that I've outlined during this presentation, which is, first of all, that you get to focus your accessibility testing on core tasks. Okay, as I said, make sure at a minimum that whatever the core task is, let's say you're a hotel website or business, your booking flow is going to be your key user journey. You want to make sure that at a minimum that is accessible. So really you should have that user journey defined for you, and that becomes an instant priority. Okay, anything on that user journey is a priority by default. I mentioned before, very few people are going to be 100% compliant. Probably very few will be more than 50% compliant. So you need to make sure your core user journeys are fully accessible and usable. The other justification for it would be, as I said, to focus down your testing. By building your user journey, you're getting that good sampling. You're getting a really good representative sample, which is a valuable asset because you don't have time to test everything. So narrowing it down to representative components will help you do your testing in less time. And of course, it keeps your focus always on the users. And so you understand what the users are trying to do. And as I said, accessibility testing obviously doesn't involve that a lot. It involves following guidelines and making sure it's compliant with guidelines. Doing that, you often don't understand what you're doing and who you're doing it for. You don't understand the nature of the problem. I'm doing this for screen reader users, for example, who don't know what these images contain, don't know what this button or checkbox is or what state it's in. I'm doing it for them to make sure that they can use these controls, okay? And this is the reason why they have this challenge. So when you understand that, you're not painting by numbers with accessibility, you're getting it, and it will get you much more effective at addressing accessibility in the future. So there's a lot of reasons that would justify taking this approach in terms of your accessibility testing. And usability and accessibility are totally interlinked. At the end of the day, accessibility is part of usability. And so it should never be taken out of that context.
That looks to be all the questions. So unless you have anything else to add, Charlie, we probably can wrap everything up. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you indeed. Thank you for your time.
All right, have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we will be sending out the recording after the session. Thank you. Goodbye.
Very good.